You know, I believe it was Mark Twain that said, "Against the weapon of laughter, nothing can stand." So this evening, we would like for you just to sit back and relax and fill the room with laughter. And your speaker this evening was born and raised in Missouri, but spent much of his life in the North. He was a printer, a newspaper man, a steamboat pilot, a Confederate soldier briefly, a miner, a publisher, and a humorous lecturer. Ladies and gentlemen, one of the world's great authors, Mark Twain.
Well, thank you, Judith, for that wonderful complimentary introduction. I've been complimented many times like that. They always embarrass me. I never feel they've said enough. I was born modest, but it wore off. I was once presented to an audience by a lawyer who kept his hands in his pockets as he presented me as Mark Twain, a humorist who is really funny. A very rare creature indeed. Well, I was struck speechless by that complimentary thunderbolt. Well, never in my experience of life had I listened to a compliment so beautifully phrased and so well deserved. But we had in our audience a much rarer creature than a humorist who is really funny. We had a lawyer who kept his hands in his own pockets. Any lawyers here tonight? Maybe I'm safe for a while. But, you know, everyone loves compliments. We all do. Humorists, burglars, congressmen, all of us in the trade. If you can't get a compliment any other way, I say pay yourself one. I do it often. I can do it right now. I can say that there are two people in this world who are most remarkable. One is Martha Stewart. And I'm the other one. Between us, we cover all knowledge. She knows all that can be known, and I know the rest. I received a compliment from a little Montana girl one time. Came to me indirectly. She was in a room where there was a large photograph of me up on the mantelpiece, and after staring at it for a while, she said, "We've got a picture of John the Baptist, too." Then she said, "Only ours has more trimmings." I think she referred to the halo. Mine hasn't arrived yet. Here's a compliment from an old miner out in Red Dog, California. Well, it wasn't a compliment exactly, but he got up on stage with me to introduce me to a bunch of old miners, and he said, "I don't know anything about your speaker this evening. That is, I know only two things. One is he's never been in the penitentiary, and the other is I don't know why. One of the world's great authors, I'm sorry to have my name mentioned with those. They have such a sad habit of dying off. Chaucer is dead, you know. So is Milton. So is Shakespeare. And I'm not feeling very well myself. My doctor tells me I'm on the verge of being a sick man. Well, I can't put any stock in that. I've been on the verge of being an angel all my life. That hasn't happened yet. He's not a very good doctor anyway. Only had 2 patients last year. One of them was a horse. The other was a sailor. The sailor came in with a rolling gait and a distressed face, and the doctor asked him what was the matter with him, and the man said, well, he didn't know, but that he was a sailor. He treated him for that. You never saw a man die more peacefully. Well, I want to thank you for attending the services this evening. Now, I understand there's a commandment against smoking during insurrections of this dignified nature, but I'm working to get it removed. I have nothing against abstinence as long as it doesn't harm anybody. I practice it myself on occasion. I make it a rule never to smoke when asleep. Oh, not that I care for moderation myself. I do it as an example to others and to prove I'm not a slave to the habit. I can give it up anytime I want to. I've done it 1,000 times. I want to thank you for attending these services. I almost missed them myself. I came by railroad. It was one of those trains that gets tired every 7 minutes and has to stop and rest for 3/4 of an hour. A passenger advised the conductor to take the cowcatcher off the front end and put it on the rear, because at the rate we were going, we were not going to catch any cows. But there wasn't anything to prevent them from climbing aboard on the rear end. If I have to go to heaven by railroad, I shall go the other way. When I was a young man studying for the gallows, I took a trip out west on the stage, and I was seeking my fortune out there. But I was rather particular about the kind of job I got. I didn't want to work. So I became a newspaperman. No newspapermen here today. Well, we had a 2-day layover at Salt Lake City. And Not enough time to get up the usual inquisition into polygamy. And finally, the usual statistics, preparatory to calling the attention of the nation once more to the matter. I had the will to do it, oh yes. With the gushing self-sufficiency of youth, I was feverish to plunge in there and make a great reform. Until I saw the Mormon women. And then I was touched. My heart was wiser than my head. And it warmed to these poor, ungainly, homely women. And as I turned to hide the jealous moisture in my eye, I said, no, the man that marries one of them has done an act of Christian charity. And deserves the applause of mankind and not their harsh censure. And the man that marries 60 of them has done a deed of open-handed generosity so sublime that the nations should stand uncovered in his presence and worship in silence. I talked to a man named Johnson who said he had had a conversation with Brigham Young, the leader of the Mormons. And this is what he said Mr. Young told him. Marriage, sir, is a perfect dog's life. You can't economize. It is impossible. The wash bill alone, 965 pieces a week. And cradles, think of it. And soothing syrup, and teething rings, and Pabst watches for the babies to play with, and things to scratch the furniture with, and matches for the babies to eat, and pieces of glass to cut themselves with. Why, the island of glass alone would keep your family going for a week, I feel sure. Scrimp and save all I can. I can't get ahead. Why, bless you, sir, at a time when I had 72 wives in this house, I groaned under the pressure of having thousands of dollars tied up in 72 bedsteads, when that money ought to have been out at interest. So I just sold a whole lot of it, sir, at a sacrifice, and built a bedstead 7 feet long and 96 feet wide. But it was a failure, sir. No, I couldn't sleep. It seemed like the whole 72 women snored at once. The roar was deafening. But the danger of it, that was what I was looking at. Why, those 72 women would all draw in a breath at once, and you could actually see the walls of the house suck in. And then they would all exhale, and the walls would swell out, and the rafters would creak and groan, and the shingles grind together. Oh, take the advice of an old man, sir, and don't encumber yourself with a large family. Don't do it. Take my word for it, 10 or 11 wives is all you need. Don't go over it. Well, that was the end of the supposed conversation with Brigham Young, but some instinct or other made me set this Johnson down was being unreliable. Well, we got on out there to the west coast, and I arrived there with a very bad cold. A lady at the hotel advised me to drink a quart of whiskey every 24 hours. Another friend recommended exactly the same thing. That made half a gallon. I'd been drunk before, but that was a masterpiece. I went to bed early that night. Had a terrible nightmare. I dreamt I was drowning or being baptized, one or the other. Well, actually, I guess it was the latter, because I remember I was rescued from Bear Creek 6 times when I was growing up in a substantially drowned condition, and my mother would always just say, well, I don't suppose there was any danger. People who are born to be hanged are safe in the water. She was the funny one. Well, I've been trying to throw some variety into these services. I wrote to Andrew Carnegie requesting a hymn book. It got in the papers, my letter did. It said, "Dear Mr. Carnegie, I see in the papers that you're very prosperous. I need a hymn book. It costs $2. God will bless you. I will bless you. And it will do a great deal of good. Truly yours, Mark Twain. P.S. Don't send the hymn book. Send the $2. Well, I wanted to select it myself. I'm not lying to you. I don't tell lies. I differ from George Washington. I have a higher and grander standard of principle. Now, George could not tell a lie. I can, but I won't. Well, I have to tell you that I have told one lie. Well, it's part of my scheme for revolutionizing the morals of the globe. You see, I have this theory that you should prize as a priceless possession every transgression, every crime that you commit. The lesson of it, I mean. Lay it away in your memory and you won't ever commit that crime again as long as you live. There are 462 crimes possible. And when you've committed all of them, you will have reached a state of moral perfection. And I am more than 2/3 up there. Several years ago, I was laid up in my bed for several days with a lumbago. And my doctor finally said to me, look here, my remedies haven't a chance. Look what they have to fight besides the lumbago. You smoke extravagantly. You eat all manner of things that don't agree with each other's company. You drink 2 scotches every night, don't you? I said, yes, I do. But I only drink them as a preventative of toothache. I've never had the toothache. I don't ever intend to have it. He said, well, that's all right, but we can't make any progress that way. You're going to have to moderate those things. I can't do it, doctor. Why not? Because I lack the willpower. I can cut them out entirely, but I can't moderate them. He said, well, that would answer. So I cut out all those things for 2 days and 2 nights. And at the end of that time, the lumbago was discouraged and left me. I was a well man again. So I gave thanks and returned to these delicacies again. It seemed a good system, so I recommended this remedy to an elderly lady friend of mine. She'd gone down and down to the point where medicines no longer had any helpful effect. I told her I could cure her in a week. I said she must give up smoking and drinking and swearing and eating, and at the end of that time she'd be on her feet. Why, she said she couldn't give up smoking and drinking and swearing because she'd never done any of those things. So there it was. She had neglected her habits. She was a sinking ship with no freight to throw overboard. Just 1 or 2 little habits would have saved her. She was just a moral pauper. From this code of morals that I have been following and revising for 70 years now, I remember one detail. I have always been honest, comparatively honest. I could never use money that I had not made honestly. Now, there was a time out there on the coast when my roommate and I needed $3 very badly. Now, he said we should go out separately to find it. He was a Presbyterian of the old and genuine school, and he had no doubt that we would be successful. I didn't have his confidence, and I told him. Well, I think he was ashamed of my weak faith. And he said in a simple way, the Lord will provide. Well, I could see that he really believed that the Lord would provide. But it seemed to me that if he'd had my experience, but never mind that. He almost made me believe that the Lord would provide. Well, I wandered around the streets for an hour, and then I gave up finding the money lying about. And I was in a hotel lobby in despair when I spotted a beautiful, unfriended dog. The dog saw me too, and at once we became acquainted. Then Brigadier General Miles came strolling by in all his blue and gold splendors, and he saw the dog. and came up and started to pet him and said, "He is very fine. He is a wonder. Would you sell him?" I was greatly moved. It seemed a marvelous thing to me, the way my roommate's prediction had come true. "Yes," I said. "Well, what do you ask for him?" $3. $3, only $3? Well, that dog must be at least worth $50. If he were my dog, I wouldn't take $100 for him. Reconsider your price if you want to. I don't want to wrong you. Well, if he had known me, he would have known that he was no more capable of wronging me than I was of wronging him. And I restated my offer. I said, "No, 3 is the price." He said, "Very well, if you insist upon it." And he gave me the $3 and led the dog away up to his room. Then in came a sweet little middle-aged man who at once began looking around the lobby. "Did you lose a dog?" I asked. He said he had. "I think I can find him," I volunteered, "for a small sum." "How much?" he asked. $3. Oh, he urged me to accept more, but I said, "No, 3 is the price." It seemed to me it would be sacrilegious to take a penny more than was promised. And I went up to the general's room. He was caressing his dog and quite happy. I said, "I'm sorry, but I have to take the dog again." "Take him again? But he's my dog. You sold him to me, and at your price." "It's true, but I must have him again. The man wants him." "What man?" "The man that owns him. He wasn't my dog." "Wasn't your dog? You mean you were selling another man's dog and you knew it?" "Well, yes, I knew that he wasn't my dog." "Then what did you sell him for?" "Well, that's a very curious question to ask. I sold him because you asked me to sell him to you. You wanted him. I wasn't anxious to sell him. I wasn't even thinking about selling him. But it seemed to me if it could be any accommodation to you, accommodation to me, the idea of selling a dog that was not yours." I broke in and I said, "Now look here, you said that the dog was probably worth $100. I only asked you 3. Was there anything unfair about that?" He said, "What in the world has that got to do with it? The point is, you didn't own the dog. Can't you see that?" "Well," I said, "I must have him back because the man wants him. Don't you see I don't have any choice in the matter? But just put yourself in my place. Suppose you had sold a dog that didn't belong to you. Suppose you..." "Oh," he said, "don't muddle my brains anymore with your idiotic reasonings. Take him along and give me a rest." So I gave him back his $3. I led the dog downstairs, turned him over to his owner, and took 3 for my trouble. I went away with a good conscience because I had acted honorably. I had earned that money. That man might never have found his dog again if it hadn't been for me. But that $3 I got for selling that dog, I couldn't have used that money because it wasn't rightfully mine. The only thing I could have done with it was lend it. Speaking of lending money, I once knew a banker who had a glass eye. He was very proud of it and had it made in Paris. It had cost him $5,000. He said, "I bet you can't tell which one is the glass eye." I said, "Of course I can. It's the left one. It's the only one with the glint of human kindness in it." A banker is a fellow who will lend you his umbrella when the sun is shining, but wants it back the minute it begins to rain. Any bankers here tonight? Good. Well, I was publishing my first book, and I was out there still on the West Coast. I needed to raise some money, so I hired a hall and gave a lecture. I've never had to do a day's work since. I had a new career, and I went forth upon the public highway with all the other bandits and gave readings from my works. And that's where I made the acquaintance of that constant menace to the itinerant lecturer, the local interviewer. These people probe you with personal questions which you answer as conscientiously as you can, and then they run home and improve you. And the result is you don't recognize yourself in print, unless you happen to be an idiot of long standing, with no prejudices about it. I always try to outwit these people. One of those villains came to me when I was out on a raid. He knocked on my hotel room door and announced that he was connected with the daily thunderstorm. I was going to break the chair over him, but he sat down on it before I could go into action. I was not at my best that morning. My powers were somewhat under a cloud, so I thought I'd better try to confuse him. He said, "Would you let me ask you questions calculated to bring out the notable points of your personal and public life?" I said, "Well, I have a very bad memory." "Well, that's all right, just so that you will do the best you can." I will put my whole mind to it." "Well, thanks. Now, are you ready to begin?" "Ready." "Well, how old are you?" 19. In June. "Why, I would have taken you to be much older than that." Well, thank you very much." "Well, where were you born?" "In Missouri." "And when did you first begin to write?" "And 1836. "Well, how can that be, if you're only 19 now?" "I don't know." That does strike you as curious somehow, doesn't it? Well, yes, it does. Well, who was the most remarkable man you ever met? Well, George Washington. George Washington? Why, you never could have met Washington if you're only 19. Well, if you know more about me than I do, what do you ask me for? Well, it was only a suggestion. How did you happen to meet Washington? Well, I happened to be at his funeral one day. And he asked me to make less noise. Good heavens, if you were at his funeral, he must have been dead. As if he was dead, why should he care whether you made a noise or not? Oh, he was always a very particular sort of a man that way. Well, let me get this straight now. You say he spoke to you, and yet he was dead? Oh, well, I didn't say he was dead. But wasn't he? Well, some said he was, yeah. Some said he wasn't. Well, what did you think? Well, it wasn't any of my business. It wasn't my funeral. Well, let's go on to something else. Have you any brothers or sisters? I think so, yes, but I can't remember. That's the most extraordinary thing I ever heard. I'm sure there was a brother. Didn't I read that somewhere? Oh, yes. Now that you mention it, there was a brother. William. Bill, we called him. Poor old Bill. Why? Is he dead? We never could tell. There was always a great mystery about that, you see. How sad. He disappeared then. Well, yes, in a sort of a general way. We buried him. Buried him? You buried him without knowing whether he was dead or not? Oh, no. He was dead enough, all right. He was always pretty dead. You see, we were twins, Bella and I. And we got mixed up in the bathtub when we were 3 weeks old. And one of us was drowned. But we never knew which. Some think it was Bill. Some think it was me. Well, what did you think? Oh, I'd give worlds to know. But there was a very curious thing about it. One of us had a peculiar mark, a large mole on the back of his left shoulder. That was me. And that child was the one that drowned. That was the end of the interview. But that evening in the paper, I saw the following caption: deranged old man, loose, in local hotel, harmless, if not roused up. I met a lot of interesting people out there. Mariah Whitaker, now you would have liked her. There was a girl for you. Just as good and sweet and lovely and generous as the day is long. Why, if she had a thing you wanted it, you could have it. Have it and welcome. She had a glass eye. And she used to lend it to Flora Ann Baxter that hadn't any, to receive company with. Well, Flora Ann was pretty large, and it didn't fit. It was a number 7. She was excavated for a 14. Every time she winked, that eye would whirl over. It was a beautiful eye. Set her off admirably. It was painted a pale blue on the front side. That's the side you look out of. And it was gilded on the back side. Didn't match the other eye, which was one of them browny yellery eyes and tranquil and quiet. You know the way that kind of eyes are. That's all right. They work together all right. Plenty picturesque. Every time Flora Ann winked, that blue and gilt eye would whirl over. And when she came to get excited, that handmaid's eye would give a whirl. And go on a whirling and a whirling. Faster and faster. Flashing first blue, then yellow, then blue, then yellow. The other one would stand still. When that one eye got to whizzing and flashing like that, why, the oldest man in the world couldn't keep up with the expression on that side of her face. Grown folks didn't mind it much, but almost always made the children cry. Sort of scary, don't you see? I left San Francisco, and when I left, I did more for that city than any other resident. When I left, the population zoomed up 100,000. I could have done more. I could have left earlier. It was suggested. I went east, and I met a young woman by the name of Olivia Langdon. She was 22 and slender and girlish and beautiful. She was both girl and woman. And 2 years later, we were married. And she reformed me for a while. And then I reformed her. Shortly after we were married, I wrote to Libby's parents. I said, Libby's coming along better and better with her housekeeping. This morning, we had mackerel, fricasseed with pork and oysters. And it was a dish to stir the very depths of one's benevolence. We saved every single bit of it for the poor. We lived in Hartford, Connecticut. the insurance center of the world. After I'd become sufficiently notorious there, I was made a director in an accident insurance company. I was at a fire one time, and I recognized an elderly client of ours leaning out of a fourth-story window yelling for help. Well, everybody stood around, but nobody did anything. Nobody had any presence of mind but me. I came to the rescue. I called for a rope. When it came, I took one end of it and threw it up to the old man. He caught it, and I told him to tie it around his waist. He did so, and I pulled him down. I had an uncle got himself killed in much the same way one time. Poor fellow. It was just awful. Yeah, he never had any insurance, and he was always sorry about it afterwards. It was the 4th of July, and this poor uncle of mine, full of patriotism, opened his mouth to hurrah, and a rocket went right down his throat. Before that man could call for a glass of water to quench that thing, it blew up, scattered him all over. You know, a man can't have an experience like that, be entirely cheerful the rest of his life. I had another uncle got himself killed in exactly the same way on a different 4th of July. And it trimmed him as it would a tree. He had hardly a limb left on him anywhere. All we have now is an expurgated edition of that uncle. There's just one other testimonial about a poor fellow that went in to see a dentist, a certain Dr. Tushmaker. Well, I can't help it, that was his name. To have a tooth out. Well, the dentist pulled and pulled, but the tooth wouldn't come. But the patient's right leg came up. The dentist said, "What are you doing that for?" He said, "Well, I can't help it." He said, "Well, you come back at the end of the week and I'll take care of you." Well, during the week, the dentist invented an instrument containing the properties of the screw, the wedge, the lever, the hammer, and the inclined plane. The patient came back and sat in the chair. One turn of the crank and out came the tooth. Its roots were hooked under the patient's right big toe. And his whole skeleton was extracted. They had to send him home in a pillowcase. I remember right, we got him a wonderful job in the circus as the rubber man. You know, 2 or 3 of those last stories might have been stretchers. Huckleberry Finn said in his book, "Mr. Mark Twain tells the truth mainly. There are things which he stretches, but mainly he tells the truth." Someone once quoted me as saying, "When in doubt, tell the truth." Yeah. What I really said was, when you are in doubt, tell the truth. When I am in doubt, I use better judgment. And I see in the papers that the political parties are squabbling about money again. Parties that accuse the ones in power of gobbling up the spoils. Remind me the story of the wolf that looked in the door and saw the shepherds eating mutton and said, "Oh, certainly it's all right as long as it's you." But there'd be hell to pay if I was to do that. I served a stretch in Washington once as a newspaper correspondent. And every day I went over to Congress, that grand old benevolent asylum for the helpless, and reported on the inmates there. It was very interesting. Never had I seen a body of men with tongues so handy and information so uncertain. I'm sure they could talk for a week without getting rid of an idea. If one of those men had been present when the deity was on the verge of saying, "Let there be light," we never would have had any. Myself, I plan to run for the presidency. Yes. Well, the people that run have no principles. I'm for anything that anybody else is for. Could be no wider platform than mine. I'm for everything and anything. Temperance and intemperance. Morality and, well, qualified immorality. Gold standard and free silver. I've tried everything in my life. I have been a reporter, editor, publisher, author, lawyer, burglar. I have worked my way up and wish to continue to do so. I've had a good life. I've traveled and seen all the foreign countries, except heaven and hell. And I have only a vague curiosity about one of them. Well, you've been a good audience. But it's time for me to go. My feet are tired. And you are tired. But before I close, I want to do something I've never done before. I want to give some credit to the harder working member of this partnership. This lady does all the hard work. And I get up here and play. She's my better 7/8, and I mean that. The love of my wife, Judith. Well, there's some young folks in the crowd today. And if you'd like me to, I could tell you a ghost story. But you'd have to come up here and sit on the stage. Would you do that? Come on. Come on, fellas. Any other gentlemen? young ladies and young gentlemen, from history, that there used to be such a thing as slavery. Remember that? Study that. And then we had the Civil War, and did away with it, thank goodness. But back in my time, my father owned a slave, and his name was Daniel. We called him Uncle Daniel. And he was the best head around, and one of the best people I ever knew, and the best storyteller too. Us black and white children would gather every night on his hearth and listen to him tell stories. I can see the firelight glowing on the back of the wall, shadows. The creepy joy which came over me when the time for the ghost story was reached. And the sense of regret, too, because it was always the last story of the evening. And there was nothing between it and the unwelcome bed. Now, Uncle Daniel sounded like this. Once upon a time, there was a monstrous, mean man. And he lived way out in the prairie, all alone by himself. Except he had a wife. By and by, she died. And he took and toted her way out there in the prairie and buried her. Well, she had a golden arm, all solid gold from his shoulder down. He was powerful, powerful. And that night he couldn't sleep because he wanted that golden arm so bad. So when it come midnight, he couldn't stand it no more. And he'd get up, and he took his lantern, and he plunged out through the storm. And he dug her up, and got the golden arm. Then he bent his head down, began to wind, and plowed and plowed and plowed through the snow. All of a sudden he stopped, and he listened, and say, "My land, what's that?" And then the wind say, and then way back yonder, where the grave is, you hear a voice. You hear a voice all mixed up in the wind. Can't hardly tell them apart. And he began to shiver and shake and say, oh my land. And the wind blew the lantern out. And the snow and sleet blow in his face and was choking. And he started plowing knee deep towards home, most dead. He's so scared. And then way back yonder, he heard that voice again. And it's coming after him. When we get to the house, he rush upstairs and jump into bed and kiver up head and ears. And lay there shivering and shaking. And then way out there, he heard the voice again. And coming out there in the dark. Storm. Pretty soon he hear bang, bang, bang. It's a coming upstairs. And then he hear the latch. And he know it's in the room. Pretty soon he knows it's standing on the bed. And then it's leaning down over him, and he can't scarcely get his breath. And then he feels something cold right down almost against his head. And the voice say right in his ear, "God, my golden heart." Your life! Thank you. Well, a warm response like that fills me with charity. I feel the same charity towards everyone as that gentleman who was coming home from his club one evening at 2 a.m., feeling perfectly satisfied with life, so happy, comfortable. And there was his house weaving and weaving and weaving around. He watched the front steps. And when they got into his neighborhood, he made a jump and climbed up and got onto the portico. And the house went on weaving around. He watched the front door. And when it came around again, he plunged through. He went up the stairs on all fours. And the house was so unsteady he could scarcely make his way. When he got to the top, his toe hitched on the top step, and he rolled all the way down to the bottom step and ended up with his arm around the newel post. And he looked up and said, "God help the poor sailors out at sea on a night like this." Well, it's a terrible death to be talked to death. So I'm leaving you now while at least half of you are still alive. Thank you very much.
We have refreshments out in the lobby for all of you, but I wanted to give Mr. Twain a copy of our book that's a benefit for the Historical Society, and I'm sure many of you already have it. It's called Images of America, Grosse Pointe, 1880 to 1930. Mr. Twain?
Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome.